Before the 1970s, computers were massive, room-sized machines that cost millions of dollars. Only governments and large corporations could afford them, and they required specially trained technicians to operate. For ordinary people, computers seemed completely out of reach. But in the mind of a Harvard dropout, the computer was something else entirely, a personal tool that would be present on every desk and in every home. From hacking school systems to negotiating with the biggest names in technology, Gates's journey was defined by an ability to see value where others saw nothing. When he licensed an operating system to IBM rather than selling it outright, he didn't just make a business deal, he restructured the entire economic model of the computer industry. He made a bet that software would eventually outvalue hardware, a gamble that unleashed the clone wars and put Microsoft at the center of the global economy. This is the story of how one restless mind outmaneuvered an entire industry through a combination of brilliance, ambition, and timing. Part 1. Trey. William Henry Gates III was born in 1955 in Seattle, Washington. His parents nicknamed him Trey, reflecting the Roman numeral 3 after his name, a moniker that would stick throughout his entire childhood. Trey's family background was one of prosperity. His mother's family, the Maxwells, were prominent Seattle bankers who eventually would leave Gates a $1 million trust fund. Trey's mother, Mary, was born into this elite Northwest upper crust. She met her future husband, Bill Gates Jr., at University of Washington, a tall law student from more humble beginnings who became the first in his family to graduate from college. His association with the Maxwell family helped him prosper as an attorney in Seattle, eventually becoming a demanding and successful lawyer, traits not unlike his son. The Gates family was closely knit. Bill, his parents, and 2 sisters shared lively dinner table discussions that created what he would later describe as a rich environment in which to learn. When Trey was 11, his parents made a fateful decision. He was far ahead of his peers and desperately needed new intellectual challenges. They enrolled him at Lakeside, an exclusive private school known for its high academic standards. Gates thrived in this environment. He was small for his age, but intellectually ferocious, with a competitive streak that bordered on obsessiveness. In 1968, the school decided students should be exposed to the technology of the future, computers. It was a radical idea at a time when even most universities lacked computer access. The problem was money. Mainframe computers cost millions of dollars, and even smaller mini-computers were the size of refrigerators with price tags beyond any school budget. So to solve this problem, the Lakeside Mothers Club raised $3,000 through a rummage sale. They bought a teletype machine that connected via phone lines to a PDP-10 computer, a program data processor in downtown Seattle, and paid General Electric for computer time. They used BASIC, or Beginner's All-Purpose Symbolic Instruction Code, to communicate with the mainframe. Developed by Dartmouth professors to make computing accessible, this code allowed Gates to write his very first programs and games. The school would pay for computer time by the minute. They assumed the money would last the year, but it barely lasted a few weeks. The computer room, housing the machine, became the center of Gates's universe. There he met Paul Allen, a student 2 years his senior, who shared his obsession. Together with Kent Evans and Richard Weiland, they formed the Lakeside Programmers Group, spending every spare moment at the terminal, neglecting other classes, drinking Coca-Cola, and devouring technical manuals. When computer time bills kept mounting, Lakeside switched to a cheaper provider, Computer Center Corporation, or C-Cubed, a Seattle startup that offered time sharing on their PDP-10. But costs still added up quickly. Gates and his friends hacked the system to lower their bills. They got caught. Unexpectedly, the company saw an opportunity. One founder had a son at Lakeside. He knew these kids were talented. The company offered unlimited free computer time in exchange for deliberately hacking the system and documenting every bug they found. For Gates and Allen, it was a dream arrangement. After school, Gates would take the bus to C-Cube's offices, often staying until dawn. What started as free computer time became an education money couldn't buy. He and Allen even used their new skills to launch their first business, Trafo Data. Cities used rubber tubes stretched across roads to count passing cars. But the paper tapes had to be analyzed by hand, so the boys built a system to do it automatically. Despite the venture's modest entrepreneurial success, Gates wasn't sure what he wanted to do with his life. life. After graduating from Lakeside, he enrolled at Harvard in 1973 with no clear career path. He technically majored in pre-law, but spent his nights playing high-stakes poker and holed up in the computer center. Allen, who had moved to Boston to work for Honeywell, kept pressing Gates with a singular vision. The microprocessor was going to make personal computing a reality, and they needed to be ready. The moment arrived in December 1974. On a walk through Harvard Square, Paul Allen saw the cover of Popular Electronics featuring the Altair 8080, a kit computer based on the Intel 8080 chip. "It's happening," Allen told Gates. The revolution had started without them. Part 2. Microsoft. Gates and Allen called Ed Roberts, the head of MITS in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Gates boldly claimed they had written a version of BASIC for the Intel 8080 chip inside the Altair. It was a complete bluff. They had no code, no Altair to test on, nothing but ambition. Edward Roberts, the founder of micro-instrumentation and telemetry systems, was a large, imposing man who had heard such claims before, so he issued the challenge. The first person through his door with working software would get the contract. For 8 weeks, they barely slept. Without an Altair, Allen simulated the chip on Harvard's PDP-10 mainframe, while Gates wrote the BASIC interpreter. They recruited a fellow student to write the math routines, allowing the computer to handle decimal numbers. By late February 1975, their code was ready and punched onto paper tape. Allen would make the trip to New Mexico. Gates looked too young to be taken seriously. During the flight, Allen realized they'd forgotten the bootstrap loader, the commands needed to tell the Altair how to read the tape. He frantically hand-coded it in binary with pencil and paper. At the MITS headquarters, Allen faced the Altair for the first time, a blue box with toggle switches. He manually entered his handwritten code, switch by switch, then fed in the tape. The teletype clattered to life. Ready. It worked perfectly on hardware they had never touched. Roberts was impressed. They had transformed his box of blinking lights into a functioning computer. Before their BASIC interpreter, using the Altair meant flipping dozens of switches in precise patterns to make the computer add 2 numbers or blink a light. Now, a user could sit at a teletype keyboard and type print 2 + 2, and the machine would respond with 4. They could write loops, make decisions, store data, all with simple English-like commands. Allen called Gates with the news, and he joined him in New Mexico once he finished his second year at Harvard. The friends formalized their partnership as Microsoft, short for microcomputer software, with a hyphen in between, which would later be dropped. They set up their first office in an Albuquerque motel room on Route 66. They recruited a team of programmers, mostly friends from Lakeside and Harvard, who became known as the Micro Kids. The culture was chaotic. No dress code, no set hours, Coca-Cola cans littering the floor. Gates was 19 and set the pace, often working for days without sleep, collapsing under his desk for brief naps. Under his relentless drive, the team expanded their product line with more powerful versions of BASIC and compilers for business languages like Fortran and COBOL. However, by 1977, Microsoft and MITS were at odds. The Altair's dominance was fading, and the relationship between Roberts and Gates was increasingly tense. Ed Roberts sold MITS to a firm called Pertec. The new owners claimed they owned Microsoft's BASIC too. Gates and Allen fought back, initiating a difficult legal battle, and despite facing corporate lawyers, Gates's mastery of contract details won the case. Microsoft was declared free to license their software to anyone. With their independence secured and recruiting talent in Albuquerque proving difficult, they relocated. In January 1979, Microsoft moved to Bellevue, Washington, with a dozen employees and a clear strategy: a computer on every desktop, and Microsoft software in every computer. Then, in July 1980, IBM came calling. The Blue Giant was preparing to enter the personal computer market, a space it had long dismissed. But with Apple's sales exploding and competitors emerging everywhere, IBM's executives finally recognized the threat. They assembled a secret team with an unprecedented mandate: build a personal computer in 1 year using outside vendors. Jack Sams, an IBM executive, called Microsoft. He wanted a meeting immediately. When the IBM delegation arrived, they mistook Gates for an office assistant. He was 24, but looked 17. Once the meeting began, however, Gates dominated the room with his technical knowledge and business instincts. IBM needed programming languages: BASIC, COBOL, Fortran. Microsoft could provide those. But they also needed an operating system. Gates directed them to Gary Kildall at Digital Research in California. His CP/M operating system was at the time the industry standard before the rise of MS-DOS, but the meeting was a disaster. Kildall wasn't there. His wife and lawyer refused to sign IBM's non-disclosure agreement, and the talks collapsed. Frustrated and running out of time, the IBM team flew back to Seattle. They asked Gates if Microsoft could provide the operating system along with the languages. Gates didn't have one, but he knew who did. Down the road at Seattle Computer Products, a programmer named Tim Patterson had written a clone of CP/M he called QDOS, the Quick and Dirty Operating System. Paul Allen drove down to negotiate a licensing deal for $25,000. By July 1981, with the PC launch looming, Gates realized he needed full ownership. Allen returned with a final offer, $50,000 for complete rights. Seattle Computer Products, still unaware the customer was IBM, agreed. For the price of a luxury car, Microsoft had purchased the engine that would drive the personal computer industry. They renamed it MS-DOS for Microsoft Disk Operating System. With the software in hand, Gates made the most critical business decision of the 20th century. When IBM offered to buy the code outright, Gates refused. Instead, he licensed it. IBM would pay a few dollars to ship it with each of its computers, but Microsoft would still own the software and could sell it to anyone else. IBM accepted. They believed the real money was in hardware. They failed to see that their PC used open architecture. Other companies would be able to legally clone their hardware. For the next year, Microsoft worked in lockdown. IBM shipped prototype machines to a windowless room programmers called the fish tank. They worked around the clock in stifling heat, unable to tell anyone what they were building. On August 12, 1981, the IBM PC was announced in New York City. It was an instant standard, legitimizing the personal computer for business use. Big Blue had entered the market, but they had inadvertently handed the keys to the kingdom to the college dropout from Seattle. Microsoft was no longer just a language company. It was the foundation of the information age. The clone wars began immediately. Companies like Compaq reverse-engineered IBM's design, creating cheaper, faster machines that worked exactly the same. But the clones couldn't clone the operating system. Every IBM-compatible computer would need MS-DOS from Microsoft. Gates had effectively positioned himself to collect a tax on every personal computer sold, regardless of who manufactured it. Suddenly, the market was flooded with IBM-compatible machines. They were cheaper and often faster than the original. And just like IBM, they all needed an operating system. Gates was ready. He licensed MS-DOS to every one of them. Microsoft's revenues hit $16 million in 1981, then doubled to $34 million the next year. They collected royalties from IBM and every clone, Compaq, NEC, Tandy, and dozens more. The chaotic band of coders was becoming an empire. Part 3. Windows. While revenues soared, personal tragedy altered the company's trajectory. In 1982, Paul Allen was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease and resigned to focus on his health, leaving Gates as sole captain. Gates, now known for his intense confrontational style, pushed the company even harder. Gates recognized that while MS-DOS was a cash cow, it was not the future. The command line interface was clunky and difficult for average people to use. The future was user-friendly graphics, windows, icons, and a mouse. The threat, and the opportunity, arrived in the form of Steve Jobs. The charismatic co-founder of Apple had visited Xerox's research lab in Palo Alto and seen their experimental GUI technology. Jobs immediately grasped its potential and began building the Macintosh. He invited Gates to Cupertino, wanting Microsoft to write the business software, spreadsheets, and word processors that would make the Mac viable. Gates agreed, becoming one of Apple's biggest developers. But while Microsoft engineers were writing Excel and Word for the Mac, they were also studying the machine. Gates saw that the Mac was superior to the IBM PC in every way, but it was a closed system, expensive, and proprietary. He realized that if he could bring the ease of the Mac's interface to the cheap, ubiquitous hardware of the IBM PC clones, he would own the market. In November 1983, Gates announced Windows. He promised it would be on shelves by April 1984. It was a bluff to keep IBM users from defecting to Apple. Windows was famously delayed, becoming what the industry called vaporware. It didn't ship until November 1985, and even then, it was slow and buggy. But Gates was persistent. He knew that in the software game, you didn't have to be first or even the best, you just had to set the standard. Apple, feeling betrayed, threatened to sue. In a ruthless negotiation, Gates leveraged his position. If Apple sued, he would stop developing Excel and Word for the Mac, effectively killing them in the business market. Apple CEO John Sculley blinked. He signed an agreement granting Microsoft the right to use Apple's design elements. It was a catastrophic legal error and a victory that secured Microsoft's future. Meanwhile, the financial pressure for Microsoft to go public became inevitable. Gates had resisted the move for years, fearing that answering to stockholders would dilute his long-term vision. But the company had grown too large to remain private. On March 13, 1986, Microsoft launched its initial public offering. The stock opened at $21. By the end of the trading day, it sat at $28. Gates, retaining 45% of the company, was suddenly worth $350 million. By the following year, at age 31, the stock's rise made him the youngest self-made billionaire in history. Yet the day after the IPO, Gates was working as if nothing had changed. The money was merely a scorecard, the game was what mattered, and the game he was playing would soon pay off even more spectacularly. In May 1990, Microsoft released Windows 3.0. It finally worked as promised, turning ugly DOS commands into a sleek, colorful environment. It sold 10 million copies in 2 years, securing Microsoft's dominance for the next decade. By the early 1990s, the transition was complete. The boy who had hacked mainframes to get free computer time had become the richest man in America. Microsoft controlled the operating system of nearly 90% of the world's personal computers. Bill Gates had achieved his original vision, a computer on every desktop and Microsoft software in every computer. The microkid had become the Titan. Epilogue. Today, the revolution that started in Albuquerque is so complete that it has become invisible. We no longer marvel at the presence of a computer on a desk. Instead, we simply expect it to be there. Microsoft software has become the digital plumbing of civilization, the unseen infrastructure upon which banking, governance, education, and communication rely. As the 90s progressed, a tidal wave appeared on the horizon. The internet was rising, and Microsoft ruthlessly leveraged its desktop dominance to crush the pioneering browser Netscape, building Internet Explorer into Windows and forcing the industry to play by his rules once more. Gates proved he wasn't merely a lucky beneficiary of the IBM deal, but a strategist capable of continually reinventing his empire. Time and again, he adapted to existential threats, preserving Microsoft's relevance for decades to come. By 2008, Gates stepped away from the day-to-day operations, leaving his creation in the hands of others. Yet, his shadow looms large. The strategy of platform dominance, of owning the layer upon which others must build, remains the holy grail of the tech industry, imitated by companies like Facebook, Amazon, and Google. The boy who hacked the PDP-10 to get more computer time ended up building the operating system for modern life, forever changing how we think, work, and connect. This was Hard Drive by James Wallace and Jim Erickson, first published in 1992. Thank you for listening.